HighSec Buyback offers a 90% JITA anywhere in HighSec. Simply go to highsec.evebuyback.com, appraise your items, create a contract, and get paid quickly.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Talking in Stations. I'm your host Rahne, and I'm joined by my fellow co-host Arsia. And we also have... I'm good, how are you?
I'm doing well.
And then we also have Nick Bison here doing engineering in the background.
And mining with the grazing with the herd.
And apparently he's also playing the game, so he's multi-boxing the stream and the game. We have two guests here that are going to talk us through the Amarr Minmatar faction warfare scenario. So we have Aldrith and Harkon, if they want to introduce themselves. Aldrith?
Hi there, I'm Aldrith Shutaq. I've been in the Amarr Militia
ever since
just before Fact War came out. I've only really been active in helping to command the Amarr Militia the last since a major kind of RP arc started in the Warzone. And since then, I've been also, kind of on and off, but things are heating up again, and I've been commanding and excited about telling you guys all about it.
Nice, thank you. And then Harkon?
Hello, I'm Harkon Thorson. I'm the CEO of ROMS and Alliance Leader of Shutaq. I'm in the game not as long as the old fart, but like 2013 I think I started, and I joined Faction Warfare proper in 2014 and have been active in the militia since then, really.
Okay, thank you. And so our first topic of the morning, is going to be around faction warfare. So like I kind of introduced before, but I haven't been in faction warfare for quite some time. I used to PvP there, so instead I'm going to pass it over to Arsia, who is our local faction warfare pro, and she's going to walk us through the background.
All right. So today we have these two veterans on to talk about kind of the history of the Warzone and their takes on it. So I'm pretty much going to quickly turn over the floor to them. I think the first point to talk about is to tell us about when you came into the militia. What was it like for Aldrith at the beginning, and then Harkon came in at 2013? I started militia in 2012 myself. So what was it like in the beginning, Aldrith, when faction warfare first came out?
Yes. In the beginning, I was only 2 weeks old as a player of Eve. So, and I didn't actually get directly into faction war until I think it was maybe a month or two going in. So I had no idea what was actually going on. But I do remember that the Minmatar were winning quite early on. I think they outnumbered the Amarr quite considerably that early. And then I think about maybe a year or two in, I was kind of getting familiar with how to PvP and actually fit ships. And there was a huge battle in Camella between Star Fraction, which was siding with the Minmatar at the time, and by then the established Amarr militia, the corpse. And I was with Pi at that time in my first stint in it, and it was a massive battle, my first actually huge battle that I had seen, and Amarr ended up being the victors in taking down the Star Fraction player-owned star base back then, the bubble thing. Yeah, the tower. Yeah, they dropped carriers, and the Amarr just overwhelmed them with battleships. Yeah, so it was pretty happening back in the very, very beginning. There were very frequent battleship fights up until around when they introduced the tier system and the LP rewards for completing plexes. Because back then it wasn't really about taking systems, nobody cared, because there were no benefits. It was just an on paper kind technicality. And the only thing that was going on basically was the two militias just ramming their ships into each other constantly, battleship on battleships on gates and things like that, rather than inside plexes. And then everything kind of shifted once the tier system and the LP rewards started being put in, and the emphasis became more about the smaller ships that could fit into the plexes. But still, for a long while, players didn't generally care that much about system occupancy until eventually there was station lockouts. Then people kind of did care about keeping the systems just where they lived. Then Citadels came out. Then it didn't matter so much anymore. And then about 3 years ago, when CCP Delegate Zero started.
I think you're getting ahead of yourself. Because you were just talking about when you first came in, right?
Oh yeah. I was going through the whole kind of rundown of my entire time in Militia.
Don't worry about that. We're going through this whole journey together. I want to let Harkon get a chance to talk about the Militia when he joined. So Harkon, do you want to take that away?
Sure. So as I said, I started in 2013, so that was when faction warfare was already around for quite some time. And I didn't start out as a PvP player. I didn't start out as a faction warfare player. I actually did exploration and scanning down data sites and whatnot. And a friend of mine really wanted to join Minmatar Militia and was like, hey, let's try this out. So I dipped my toe into it 2013 for like a month or something. And I felt overwhelmed by the fights, by the intensity. And I was like, maybe that's not my kind of game. And I went back to exploring. But the Amarr were on the upside when I started. At least they were taking systems, and they took Las Lenua, which was the system where I was doing all the scanning usually, and that kind of brought me to the point where I was like, okay, they're all around here. Maybe I should join faction warfare. And then I joined up with my first player corporation, Minmatar Secret Service, which I'm still in, and we started fighting over plexes and the Warzone. And it was 2014. In 2014, if I remember correctly, the famous Burn Hula campaign took place. And that was a big siege of the system of Hula, where a lot of the established Minmatar militia groups had staged and lived for a pretty long time. And while that siege in of itself didn't succeed, so the Amarr were pushed off, the Minmatar won. It burned out a lot of people, and a lot of groups of the Minmatar militia left after that. So there was somewhat of a big exodus. And all of a sudden, the Warzone was kind of clear of bigger Minmatar organized groups, and our little corporation in the end of the Warzone was one of the last groups that were still somewhat, well, I wouldn't say organized, but doing something. And so one of my first experience was that at the end of 2014, I think it was December, the Amarr took the whole Warzone, drove us out of our home system, Ivati. I remember warping 10 trashers to an iHub where there was like 100 Amarr and trying to kill one. So that was my introduction to faction warfare, more or less, like the downfall of the Minmatar militia.
So you mentioned the first time the Amarr took the whole war zone, but that is an interesting story in itself, because the Amarr were pushed down to one system remaining, which was Satogas. And then they opened up a second front, I believe, in Dal, and came back from one system. It's actually a pretty crazy story. But you mentioned Burn Hula happened a little bit before that. And you mentioned your take on Burn Hula. So Aldrith, do you remember Burn Hula, the first?
Just barely. I remember Anslow, who was...
Oh, God. That's why I'm still -10 with the scope.
Yeah, exactly. So he had started a little coalition of people in the NPC Corp, the scope, because that's the default.
Yeah, they used to go around screaming, the scope, you can't cope, right?
Yeah. So I remember he was supporting the Minmatar during it, being real annoying about it too. But it was pretty funny. Yeah, he was leading people in the NPC Corp, the scope, for all these, Corpus Galente characters, and just like eating them around in thrashers and catalysts and stuff like that or something. I didn't really take part in Burnhole so much. I kind of dip my toes into it now and then, but I wasn't super active in leading or FCing back then, so I was just kind of an F1 monkey. And really, I was more about also just soloing around in certain systems with my slicer and things like that. So I have only dim memories of Burnhole. I just remember it lasted maybe a couple weeks or something, maybe, and then Amarr burnt out, and then went like, yeah, never mind.
Do you remember the last stand of?
I think I took part of that too, but I've been in faction war for so long and only dimly aware of what was going on for most of it that it's all kind of a blur. I remember some big events, but since I wasn't super involved with them at that time, it's hard to tell for me to say what was going on. I was probably in those fleets. I was probably mashing F1, but I forget who was commanding. I forget who were the driving forces and all that. So yeah.
There's a question came out of chat. Oh, it's from me. That number of folks curious about the scale that we're talking, because we're looking at the map and we see the whole war zone, and overall people have this impression that it's small scale because we always hear about the big nulls where it's 1,000 on each side. What are we talking about here in the faction war size?
So some of the fights we're talking about from years ago were a little bigger than they are now, I think. Even though I think now the ships used are kind of more significant. But compared to Null, it's always been smaller, but that's because Null has like multiple full-size fleets. Every so often there is like a big tie-dye fight in the war zone, but it usually involves like the war zone uniting against the pirate group. Like there's like for example, the first time I saw a full fleet was like the war zone and RC against like Snuff for some timer. But like the militia versus militia fights, you can see like what would you say these days? Like 30 people in a fleet?
In prime time, 30 people is something of a normal thing, I'd say. Peaks in the last years, I mean, if you're in a fleet of 50, that's kind of a big thing. If we're talking faction warfare content, not
we're not talking about like the pirates come along and everybody unites against the pirates, because then we can actually get a relatively big fight. I'm talking about like faction warfare versus faction warfare.
Then yeah, I mean 50 in a fleet. I'm pretty sure the Amarr, if they go for timers, they get 60 plus. I don't know. Maybe we could pull that as well, but when it comes to Plex fighting, the actual faction warfare, I'd say 30 is a good number. Then there's a lot of action going on. If both sides have about 30 pilots in, then that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and that's in prime time. So like depending on when you're fighting and where you're fighting, it can be much smaller. It can be like 5 versus 5. It can be like 10 versus 10.
As for the scope, I did a search on Zkill. I linked it in the podcast channel for the kills in Burnhole. That was, as far as I could tell. The funny thing is I was actually on vacation for that time. So when I basically went on vacation, everything was fine. I came back and that had happened. It looks like it's about a bit more than 8,000 kills in like a week and 172 billion killed in that Burnhole thing.
What I mostly remember from after Burnhole, during like the whole Citadels chapter, was we had to fall back from Arzad to Citadels because Arzad got taken again. Starkman got taken again. For those that don't know, the Minmatar name for the system is Starkman, and the Amarr name is Arzad, and that becomes a point of contention. The game lists it as Arzad because the Amarr is currently in Devoid, but it is the home system of the Starkmanier tribe with the name Starkman for the Minotaur.
That tribe too, that was featured in the, when they were doing the events for each race.
Yeah,
that was one of those tribes, right?
Yeah, it's one of the 7 tribes, is the Minmatar. They were thought to be extinct because like the Amarr basically genocided them in Starkman, and then they found out that there were still some Starkmanir in the Minmatar Mandate living as slaves. The Elder Fleet was assembled in secrecy, and it invaded to get those people back and bring back this tribe from the brink of death, basically. And that is kind of what kicked off the faction warfare story-wise on the Minmatar Amarr side, with the Elder Fleet going into Amarr space, tearing their way all the way to Sarum Prime, where Empress Jamel, before she was Empress, reappeared after having believed to have died from losing the Amarr tournament and committing the ritual suicide. She reappeared with a super weapon and pushed the fleet back and chased them all the way to Azara. She ascended to Empress at that time, and faction warfare began.
Interesting.
And yeah, the Starkmanir were brought back to the Republic successfully and exist as a small tribe today. And yes, you could side with them during the tribal liberation games.
Awesome, thank you.
Anyway, we were talking about what I remember about Citadels is I got pushed back to Citadels, and there were a lot of fights back then, like 100 coercers versus like 100 thrashers, and it was just really stupid because like all those, I might be exaggerating, but it was like a lot of destroyers on field, and like 6 would come out alive. And I remember just looking at Citadels being like, forget this, and like going to try to help open the other fronts when I was on. Though I was a lot more of a casual player back then compared to what I am now, I think. Anyway, after the whole coming back from Citadels, Amarr got total Warzone control. And what was it like directly after the Amarr got total Warzone control? We'll start with Aldrith, if you remember.
That would be beginning of 2015 then.
Yeah, like 2015.
Aldrith, do you want to chime in?
Is his mic dead? Do you want to talk about a Harkon? Well, Aldrith.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, we experienced
Hello?
the fall. Oh,
Yes,
now
yes.
it's back.
Cool.
All right.
Okay, hang on. Let me try to get my headset back in 1 second.
All right. Go ahead, Harkon.
Okay, so we experienced the loss of our home system in Ivati, and then the total Warzone control of the Amarr, and yeah, we kind of rebuilt from there. As I said, a lot of the bigger organized groups had left, so it was up to mostly young players that just joined faction warfare to kind of rebuild the whole thing. That's when I started to actually FC, or what I call it. I mean, I just tried to organize the 5-6 people that we had to shoot at least at the same target. And yeah, that's when we slowly rebuilt. Usha joined Minmatar faction warfare back then, and if I remember correctly, and we joined them a bit later, but it was basically a phase where we retook Bossburger, I think, as the first system and held it ever since to like last year, where the Amarr took the Warzone for the second time. And we just started recruiting. We started learning the game for those people that had just started and were trying to figure out how this whole faction warfare thing is going. Yeah, that was 2015. Nothing really important, at least from our perspective, happened other than we rebuilt Usha joined faction warfare, and then yeah.
I think a good thing to describe to some of the people watching is what a faction warfare, like a system siege in faction warfare looks like, because it's very different from going after a system in Sovnal. Since, do you want to go, Aldrith? Just talk about what a siege looks like?
Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so just real fast, returning to scale in faction war, it can actually, we do, especially now, we're getting up to like, 60 to even 100 people when we're taking on pirates as well. And that can happen also in militia and militia fights over structures and system sieges when it gets really intense. So back on system sieges. So basically, the way faction warfare is set up is that you have to take these cosmic anomaly sites that are already pre-probed, basically, and just warp straight to them. There's 4 main types plus another, and they each filter with an acceleration gate ship sizes. So you have novice complexes, which have a timer of 10 minutes that only allow Tech 1 frigates. Then you have small complexes, which have a timer of 15 minutes and let Tech 2 destroyer and down. Mediums that have 20 minutes timer and let Tech 2 cruisers and down. And then opens that let pretty much everything in without an acceleration gate.
When you say timer, well, break that down, because I'm not a faction war guy. So that means that spot, I got to complete it. It despawns. What happens?
So
yes, it's basically like a little kind of king of the hill game. So within 30 kilometers of a certain point within this kind of dead space pocket is an area where if a militia person is in it, it counts down a timer. If that timer reaches 0 for that, it basically puts 0.7% of contested level onto the system. So basically, one side needs to consecutively complete 150 complexes to bring the system to a vulnerable state. Then you can shoot the iHub and flip the system to your side. So,
and if you're in an enemy system, you have to kill a little NPC intermittently.
Yeah, that's just like a mechanism to prevent
no
rapid
guns
farming. Yeah.
But yeah,
it's negligible in PvP, and that's the point of it, because
it does like no damage.
It's supposed to be the fighter, the players who are fighting over this, not us, fighting the NPC. It's just to prevent farming, pretty much. But because of this, because there's terrain added to the PvP, you have to basically do a lot of logistics and a lot of kind of theory crafting into basically fighting inside of these complexes. So you need a comp that's only Tech 1 frigates for the novices. You need several or different kinds of comps for smalls with like Tech 2 destroyers and logistics and all this. Same thing with the cruisers, and then bigger for the larger complexes. So it's a much different metagame than anywhere else in EVE, where there's a niche for basically any kind of skill set.
You don't see Munins.
Yeah, because Munins are...
Wait for it.
Yeah. They're... Oh, really? Really, Harkon? Okay, cool.
I mean, I've seen Munins in faction warfare. We shreked them with prophecies because they didn't have enough to volley.
Yeah, because you generally don't get the critical mass for alpha doctrines, which actually makes it a lot more interesting, I think, because it's not just F1.
Well, the only alpha doctrines you sometimes see are tornadoes and TFIs, because they hit harder than a Munin. You need less people. Yeah. We did the cruise foons on some of the structure fights too. Alpha cruise foons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you do see them sometimes, but it's not Munins. It's not Eagles.
Yeah. So anyway, the kind of combat that happens in a system siege is that you're throwing ships into these various complexes as they spawn and despawn. So it's a 30-minute timer between one is captured and the next one will spawn of that size. So you're constantly having to adapt and reship and make tactical and strategic decisions on, okay, this complex is going to be spawning next. Let's ship it to that ahead of time so we're in there first, because our comp does better if we're in there first, as opposed to, okay, they're in, we know what they have in there, we can use this to break through, etc., etc. So there's a lot of reshipping, a lot of dying, and a lot of having to be dynamic and on your toes, and it's constant PvP action. It's not like a timer where it's just one fight and then you go home. You're always doing it. People have to rotate in and out because you're doing it all day. You need several FCs, but otherwise you burn out. It gets really crazy, and then you can rack up hundreds of kills in a single few hours, depending on how intense it is.
You have anything to add, Harkon, about sieges?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, basically, if a siege works the way intended and both sides are actually interested in that system and fight for it, then that is exactly what happens. You have all those free ships. Maybe an important point, I'm not sure if it was mentioned or if I missed it, but with all the plexes but the open, you have an acceleration gate and you have a point where you land. So whoever is in the plex knows where the enemy fleets will land, and that is somewhat of an important thing as well to consider, right? Because you can set up inside, you can prepare. And as for the alpha doctrines, if we're going up to cruisers, then until you reach the point of the cruisers, alpha doctrines actually kind of work, because you can have like 40 treasures in a small plex, and whatever ship comes in is going to have a hard time tanking the alpha of 40 treasures if you have 40 treasures. So I find it a very interesting environment because it allows for exactly what Aldrith just described. You can log in. If there's a fleet running, you can join the fleet, you can hop in, you can fight over 1, 2, 3 plexes, and then you can technically log off again after an hour or maybe even half an hour, or you stay on 10 hours, whatever. If the siege really works and it is the kind of content that both sides are looking for, and both sides are investing in it, as in committing their forces and their assets to it, then that is what is the peak of faction warfare for me, at least. It is nearly constant fighting, constant reships, and just non-stop pew-pew and explosions. And obviously, and that's maybe interesting for the history of faction warfare, when we're talking about the sieges like Hula and all that came before the Citadels, you couldn't actually dock in the system that you were sieging. The best thing you could have was a POS where you had the ships in the POS to reship. But other than that, you always had to do that one jump. And that is a big advantage for the defender, because having that one jump means that if you are in a plex and you're fighting 100 treasures against 100 cursors, your people will be way back before the others in their new cursors than the others in their treasures if they have to go next door.
To clarify, what Harkon's referring to is in faction warfare, if the other side controls a system, you can't dock at the stations in that system. It's one of the benefits to system control. So if like you're in Min-Mill and you're in a system controlled by Amarr, the station will tell you to get out of here, right?
Yeah, basically, and that kind of necessitates the role of structures in faction war. So if you want to siege a system and you want to be effective, or at least fighting on equal terms with your enemy, you need to be able to maintain a citadel in that system.
Though you can't tether if you're in a hostile system.
You can't tether,
Militia.
but that's usually not a big deal. I mean, yeah, they can cancel.
It's just something to mention, right?
Yeah.
Because it sometimes comes into play.
It's a small disadvantage, but it's not huge. So.
But there's always this one guy that loses something expensive because they forgot about it.
Yeah.
Not tethering is pretty major for defenses, I think, for defending the Citadel.
For the structure defense itself, yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it adds just one last thing to that. It adds to so basically, if you want to do a siege where you have a citadel in the enemy system, so you want to have the advantage of reshipping the same system, then you have to escalate, in quote marks, the faction warfare part to citadels as well. So you have to be able to defend citadels, you have to be able to remove citadels, and that is something that at least my side has struggled somewhat. But it is still an interesting thing. So you would have, if you wanted, you can have the faction warfare mechanics. You can have those fights, but you can also have structure fights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they.
So, what we just finished talking about before the tangent about sieges is we talked about the Amarr taking the Warzone after falling to one system, but then we had Minmatar come back not too far after that and take the Warzone the first time for them. There was the whole hashtag no medal thing going on, because the first time each militia took the entire Warzone, everybody in the militia got a medal. And tell me about the first time the Minmatar got that, Harkon.
Well, it's a bit of a repetition of the Amarr version, there was a few groups in Amarr Militia that left Amarr Militia, while
People burned
Minmatar,
out after taking the Warzone, yeah.
yeah. And I mean, you can understand that if
I
that's
burned
the
out after
one
taking
goal,
Warzone.
you get that medal and you're like, wow, cool, we did it. And then it's just back to before, where it's the usual grind, if you want to
Yeah.
call it that. So while Minmil was rebuilding, old groups rejoining, Ushrakan rebuilding and whatnot, Amarr was losing entities, and that all culminated in, I think it was June 2016, when we took the whole Warzone, and I think we had a marathon of like 20 IHAB bashes in a row or something. Militar, like, I don't know if he slept at all. He led those bashing fleets one after the other. It was insane. I think Shutaq was one of the.
Said, "Oh, Jebby."
Was kind of intense, but it was, I think the last system where we had really resistance, if I remember correctly, was actually Shutaq, where a few of the Team America pilots had digged in and some other people, but it was somewhat of a reputation of the Amarr Warzone control, where there was smaller groups trying to hold their systems and there wasn't that big culminating fight or something. It wasn't legendary deed like we beat them and then we took it, but it was still, for the Minmatar Militia, it was a big deal. And most of the groups that were active back then, it was Hoplite Brigade, it was Kill Them All, Bob sought them out, Bionesis and Ushrakan. Most of them merged after the medal into Ushrakan.
So before we move on to what everybody probably wants to talk about in Pholossis one, do you want to tell us about some of the groups involved? Like we've mentioned Ushrakan, Aldrith, going back to his beginnings, mentioned Star Fraction and Pi. Do you want to tell us about some of the groups over the years, up to and including now?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I started faction war actually not in Pi, but I got serious in Pi, starting with leading small gangs of slicers back around 2009. Yeah, a year or so after faction war started, and that's how I learned how to PvP. Is I was going around just solo or with a small gang of corp mates, going around the war zone, picking off plexers.
Right, but tell us about Pi. The old
Pi, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So Pi is a really, really old role-playing corp. Amarr role-play corp. And their rules are basically you can only fly Amarr ships. And it's
The
basically
oldest active corp in the game, I believe, right?
Yes, oldest active corp, yeah, still active. They're now out of faction war and in Akimi Harar. So they're done with faction war for the most part for now. But yeah, I have been in Pi cumulatively for about 10 years. It was always a small group. They were never necessarily movers or pushers within Amarr Militia. They kind of stayed separate from whatever drama was going on with the current Amarr leadership.
There's been a lot of wars in Amarr Militia over the years.
Yeah, and Pi for the most part has stayed out of that, partly because they weren't really hands-on or involved. There have been individuals who were very involved with the militia. So, for example, that Star Fraction fight that I said way in the early days.
You want to talk about who Star Fraction is?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Star Fraction. Yeah, Star Fraction was. They were a role-play alliance. Who were basically doing kind of like anarcho-capitalists who were kind of Galente Minmatar leaning, and they're very against the Amarr Empire and the Kaldari state for being oppressive. So they sided with the Minmatar militia in the early days, and the main FC who fought against them in that fight was Garth Tyrell, who used to be a member of Pi. And then he started No Mercy, which began as a Amarr Militia corporation, and then he went on to found Triumvirate. So yeah, there's been individuals in Pi who have been very, very involved with militia. I got involved when Pholossis started and helped build a coalition to take the system. And then after that, I left, and now I'm in locals primary. So yeah, and then you, Arsia, as part of Pi, you
Yeah,
started
I was in Pi
doing.
for a long time.
Oh yeah. 7 years, 8 years, I think.
Something like that, yeah. Because
Yeah.
I started the game in 2010. I joined Pi in 2000. Well, I joined Militia in 2012. I joined Pi in 2013, and I left in 2019. It was like 6.5, I think.
Yeah, and you led a lot of your roams and streams from Pi, and yeah.
Yeah, I did a lot of roaming. I
Yeah.
did some sieges, and especially towards like the end. But
Yeah.
but I did a lot of roaming, and just I liked the grinding ships to each other part more than anything else. But
yeah.
let's go. Harkon, do you want to talk about Usher?
I mean,
All right.
I also wanted to talk a little bit on my current group, which is the
All right.
main alliance in Amarr, the Amarr side of Faction War.
All right, go ahead. Tell us about Locals Primary.
So yeah, Locals Primary has been around for quite a long time, and they've been led by some of the major movers and pushers historically in Amarr Militia. So I think it was founded by Tristan de Cojuana, and now it's led by McCall Vector, and he's our main FC. It's a very, very well-run organization. It's very organized. We have very solid comps, and we're very geared towards militia warfare and beyond. So yeah, it's pretty solid, and I'd say at least on par with Ushrakan, which is led by Harkon.
So that segue into Harkon. Tell us about Ushrakan, old alliance there, oldest alliance, right?
Correct. It's the oldest. But yeah, no. So maybe I'll do the same as Aldrith and start way back when there was other entities.
Tell us about some old entities.
Obviously, I'm not an expert as I joined later, but before the whole exodus, there was a lot of at least from my perspective back then, right? Very organized groups. The Iron Oxide gang in Hula, the Hula boys, as we called them. There was, I think, White Lotus, and they were very established, but they basically collapsed, burned out after the whole Burn Hula thing, and maybe Shutaq or whatever you call it, Shutaq. And so when we really started rebuilding, there was like Hoplites Brigade, which was led by Agarasta back then, if I remember correctly. They were kind of the ones that knew how things were going, and we just tried to rebuild from what we had. And so when Ushrakan joined in 2014 and we joined, it basically from there to now, we have been, I would say, a staple in Minmatar Militia, especially after the Warzone control in 2016, where a lot of the other groups joined Ushrakan. But besides of Ushrakan, there is other groups. Most of them died a bit down over the years. We had Wild Geese or Mackey's Raiders for a while. Smile and Wave is around. The Russian-speaking corporation, or alliance better. They are on and off. They're usually in the war zone and active, but their numbers seem to come in waves. Sometimes they're more active, sometimes they're less active, but they have been a staple as well. Recently, a new group has emerged, partly from US time zone members from Ushrakan, partly from Wild Geese and other groups, Infinite Pew. They are basically the US time zone alliance in Minmatar Militia, while Ushrakan is mostly EU time zone at this point. And I mean, I'd say compared to Locals Primary, we are way less organized. It's more like a conglomeration of just people trying to do stuff, and we haven't managed yet to reach the level of organization and commitment to a certain degree, surely, when it comes to Citadel fights, for example. So we have never made that big step into the Citadel fighting with like 60, 70 people with a lot of alts in fleet and whatnot. And that's partly due to just the lack of interest on some parts, I guess, and also due to very bad experience with losing a lot of structures to snuffed out multiple times, where it just felt like no matter what we did, we tried to organize, we tried to have comms and whatnot, and then they just came around and destroyed everything anyway.
Yeah, I feel for you guys on that. Yeah, stuff has rolled over plenty of Amarr militia too, except for certain people. But
Yeah,
So,
and that
oh, go ahead.
and that kind of basically, yeah, that little plan that was growing in the sense of structures and whatnot. We did have the Fortizars and whatnot and staged out of them, and we're kind of developing or trying to develop that, and then basically Snuff came and stamped it all out, and everyone was like, "Ah, fuck that." So, and now we're trying to slowly but surely get back into the game of Citadels, but Control V is clearly superior at this point, at least when it comes to that whole area.
A lot different than flex fighting.
It is, yeah. It is way less casual. That's maybe one of the reasons why a lot of our pilots aren't as into it, I guess, or aren't as motivated, because it is clear timers. You have to be online at this time, and you have to be able to fly this and that ship to that degree and whatnot. So that's something that we always kind of lacked in faction warfare, at least in Minmatar faction warfare. Sorry. I'd say right now, for quite some time, actually, I mean, the Amarr took the Warzone last year. At that point, Control V was clearly better, as in stronger than Ushra Khan. We didn't have as many active members as they did. We didn't clearly have the assets as they did. But ever since then, with the growing of Pew, I think we are now, at least numbers-wise, we are ahead of the Amarr militia. And at least it's my perspective. I don't know if that's true, but at least when it comes to the Warzone and fighting over plexus, apart from certain systems, it also feels like the Amarr, or at least Locals Primary, has lost a bit of interest in certain aspects of faction warfare. But maybe Aldrith can elaborate on that. But yeah, that is not extending to certain systems, which one of those is the legendary system of Pholossis Win.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make a note. Like, Harkon, you mentioned wild geese. And back when I was in the Amarr militia, before Arsia defected, wild geese, I basically fought them every day. Like, something that was very different, very cool about the faction warfare lifestyle is that you run into the same people repeatedly, and you like build these rivalries over long periods of time. My old main rival actually used to be from my current alliance, Electus Matari. My old main rival used to be a pilot by the name of Azazel Draconis, who, along with a few EM people and wild geese, maybe not always wild geese with them, I fought them separately, kind of, because I had some of my best fights against wild geese, and I had some of my best fights against EM. And I saw these same people like every day, and it was pretty cool. Like, I've done a lot of like null roaming over the last couple years since I initially left faction warfare and like switched sides in joining EM. And sometimes you see people you kind of recognize, but you don't really see the same people repeatedly. And I think that's really cool about faction warfare.
I'm on a +1 that, so I'm a pirate. I haven't really joined. I mean, I joined faction warfare on an alt, and I think I maybe did it at the very beginning of my gameplay. But most of the time, I solo PvP in faction warfare space and the plexes and whatnot, and it's actually like really entertaining. So I fought like Ursha Khan a lot. Like a lot of their folks will just come and 1v1 me, and same with a lot of the Amarr guys. They're just the locals, and it's actually like I feel like that's a hidden gem of like low sec faction warfare space that nobody really talks about. Is eventually you build up these like friendships, or people like know who you are. So like I remember there were multiple times where like I would try to 1v1 someone, but then there were like a fleet of 5 other frigates. So instead we'd fleet up and then we'd go like 2v5 and just kind of like have fun with it. And it was all like super wholesome in my opinion.
Yeah. Anyway,
Speaking of rivalries, Harkon.
speaking of all that, you two had a big rivalry during the whole Pholossis Win incident.
Wait, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
I saw it in chat. So I think Nick was asking, so when you guys do these fleets, are they kitchen sink or do you guys have fleet doctrines similar to like null blocks?
It really depends on the intensity at the time and if we have a system stocked. So I know at least for Control V, we try to be in comp as often as possible. We do a lot of kitchen sink stuff, but that's more kind of roamy, or we're just messing around, or if our opponent is at the time in kitchen sink. But normally for system sieges, you have to be on comp because you're going to be dying a lot, so you kind of want things to be either on the very survivable side or the very cheap side, and you kind of need to be prepared for that. And then obviously for structure warfare, it's always comp. You never ever can go to a structure fight without a comp. Otherwise, you would just
Yeah,
get
you have
shellacked.
doctrines. They're just very different than null doctrines because of
Yeah.
the different
Okay.
circumstances.
All right. I'm sorry for
Um,
interrupting. I just wanted to
Yeah,
ask.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And that's a question people who might be interested should know. Anyway, there was an event that went down in Pholossis and the Euclidean constellation.
You want to do the whole prelude to that, or just start where the fighting starts?
Let's do the whole prelude because I think the context matters. Aldrith, do you want to start? Or
Okay, so Pholossis win. Okay, so before, let me just give a little background of what was going on before. Was that basically most players in faction war around 2018-ish, early. Okay, the Warzone deal was in 2019, right?
yeah,
October 2019 was when it
Yeah.
started.
Okay. So basically, preluding that, basically, okay, in 2019, basically, most players in faction war had started to feel it was getting really, really stale. There was really basically the players then didn't care so much about system occupancy. The well-known pattern of farmers basically just switching sides to get the LP of the winning side until it devalues, and then switching back and flipping the war zone again was established. Everybody recognized it. It kind of felt like the whole system occupancy system was a sham.
so we have to explain what flipping the war zone is for people.
Yeah, so flipping
with
the
the
war
tier
zone
system.
Yeah, so oh boy. So basically, loyalty points are rewarded when you complete a faction warfare complex. Basically, you run down the timer in one of these complexes. And most of the time, these are completely uncontested because nobody wants to fight for, basically what happens is that either bots or, low skilled farmer alts run most of these plexes uncontested just for the LP. Not because anybody cares about the system, not because anybody cares about the overall war zone. It's literally just for that incentive.
I think a lot of them actually push systems to manipulate the
yeah.
tiers so they can run the missions because that's where
Yeah,
the
for
real
sure.
ridiculous
That too.
LP is.
Yeah. We can have all sorts of theories about what really drives it, but from
Yeah.
what I've seen, yeah, it's mostly alts, AFK people who don't fight for the plexus. If you try to fight them for it, they just run as soon as they see you on the direction.
Oh, they're like empty ships in like
Yeah.
a defensive plex.
So this kind of pattern really got people jaded. And in 2019, basically a plan had come out from the Amarr side, actually, to basically lock out the mission runners from the systems where you can get the missions.
You didn't mention the tier system and why that mattered.
Yeah.
So the winning side that's currently winning, there are 5 tiers of faction warfare like control that you can be in, and the higher your tier, the lower the enemies, and the more LP you get, and the less they get. So by manipulating this tier system, people can make bank, right? And like massive waves of farmers flip flopping back and forth.
Oh, yeah.
With LP values has been a thing for a while.
Yep.
And like Aldrith said, we can debate exactly what happens, but all right, continue on.
Yeah. Okay, so by that time, I think it was Flying Hot Pocket or somebody from Team America had first proposed it, and I remember he came to us, Arsia,
Yeah.
because we were kind of the main active people in Pi at the time, and they wanted our support. But we said, okay. Basically, the proposal was this: that we would team up with Minmatar Militia, and basically willingly exchange occupancy of all the systems that held mission agents for each. So basically, Amarr would take all the Minmatar, all the systems that had a Tribal Liberation Force station, and that would lock out, in theory, anybody trying to run just missions for the LP. Then Ushrakan, I think it was the only remaining group at the time, Minmatar Militia, would take all of the Amarr systems that had a 24th Imperial Crusade station, and that would lock out all the Amarr farmers from the missions. So basically, everybody sat down, agreed to this, and it would, I think it was supposed to be for 6 months. I forget how many, or was it 3?
It was like till January, I think, right? So
from
We started-
October.
It was started in October, and the idea was to do it for the rest of the year and then see if CCP would react.
Mm-hmm. Right, and actually, this Warzone deal did get a lot of attention. I remember something in PC Gamer, like in wider gaming media, got wind of it and like published like, oh, this is another rebellion, and those crazy Eve players are doing, something or protest, blah blah blah, So this actually did get some traction and some attention.
We were actually
also,
with Flying Hot Pocket and I think Templar Dane. We were actually here on Talking Station for it, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, fair enough. So yeah, it also got the attention of CCP Delegate Zero, who is the narrative director, and he basically some talk about this Warzone deal had reached the in-character forums on the official EVE site, or the Intergalactic Summit, brought to everybody's attention by somebody here. I forget who it might be. I think
I can't remember the name. Wasn't important, I think.
No. They're definitely a big deal. Just Arsia.
have no idea who you're talking about.
Okay.
All right, it was me.
Yeah, it was Arsia.
Can you repeat the title? The title was very telling.
Mm-hmm.
Are you looking up the title now of your famous work?
It's actually my second biggest thread on the forums now, because the one about the Triglavians got bigger. Militia corruption, breaking the deafening silence on dirty deals.
Yeah.
Great.
You got a link for that? Toss it so I can share it.
Hello?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. My headset sometimes cuts out. So yeah, while you're putting that up, so basically what happened, Arsia, who was still a member of PI at the time, trying to be a good Amarian, was trying to expose this deal, this kind of collusion between the two militias in an in-character sense. And there was a big debate going on because there was an entire faction of Amarr who were against the deal, and we had actually started actively fighting Team Amarka and Ushrakan in Arzad to keep this, or to
Starkman.
yeah.
In Starkman.
Map doesn't lie.
You have to correct me. You have to expect Aldrith to say it wrong.
So anyway, yeah, we started a little civil war. At least the people who wanted to keep Arzad in the Amarr Militia, and we fought each other for a bit. And basically, I think it was Templar Dane or something who basically appeared on that in-character thread and made it clear that they would shoot Amarr Militia trying to retake the system for the Empire. And then CCP Delegate Zero, who controls all the NPCs in the universe, had a Sarm's personal secretary, House Sarm's personal secretary, appear on the IGS and basically.
Sarm being one of the royal families of the Amarr Empire.
Yeah, he's the royal family that was in charge of the Warzone basically at that point. And his secretary appeared on the IGS and said, "You're in mutiny against the Empire. I demand that Arzad be retaken and that we are going to launch a reclaiming of a certain planet in a Minmatar system of Pholossis. And that this would basically occur at some point in the future. I think it did, and it did happen as reflected in the in-universe news about a month or two later.
What that means is that the Amarr were going to actively start taking slaves in the planet in the system of Pholossis.
Yeah,
on
so
one of the
basically,
planets.
the total reclaiming of, I think it was Pholossis 4, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Pholossis
You
4.
should know.
Yeah, I know. All the
Because
planets
this
look the
was
same
something
from
that
up
wasn't
here.
generally done.
So yeah, it was Pholossis 4, where an Amarr invasion within the context of the lore was launched to basically occupy the planet and completely subjugate its populace in the name of the Amarr Empire. Obviously, this would be highly upsetting to any Minmatar RPer, and Usha'kan, as an obsessively Minmatar RP alliance, took it upon themselves to take the system. They ended up breaking the agreement December. Yeah.
So we really tried not to break the agreement. We really tried. We put up a Citadel in orbit over the planet and said that we would try to defend the planet itself, but not touch the system. There was a lot of talk about us being traitors and whatnot. There was actually a role-playing event, a moot, as we call it, where all groups of Minmatar role players came together and discussed what that means and what we should do. And obviously, everyone was pointing at Usha'kan and being like, you're responsible for this, do something about it, while not lifting anything to actually do it themselves. But the fact was that a lot of the Amarr signatories of the agreement had gone silent and had stopped logging in, and actually the Amarr side of the agreement had kind of collapsed. So that means that we tried to hold it up, but then in early December we were like, okay, this is not working. The blockade isn't working because the Amarr side can't hold up their end of the bargain. It was in a time when the swing came to the Minmatar side. That means Minmatar had increased farming activity, more people that just ran plexes up and pushed systems, and were aiming for those faction warfare mission hubs. And at start mid-December, we were like, okay, no, we can't do this anymore. There's no point in it. So we broke the agreement on our end, but only after it was basically already in shambles anyway. And we took the system, I think, like a week, a bit more of a week after the first invasion stuff actually happened on the planet, or something like that. I can't remember.
No, I think, okay, the invasion started at the end of November of 2019. You took the system back about 2 or 3 weeks after, in the middle of December.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember. This is the time when I actually very well remember the whole timeline and exactly what was going on. So from the Amarr side, when Usha'kan retook the system of Pholossis, this basically cut off the invading armies that were on the surface of Pholossis 4, as reflected in the news. So basically, every few weeks to a month or two, we would get an update about what was going on in the context of this war for the planet. And the tides, it seemed pretty clear to us that the tides would depend on who is able to control the system in space through the faction war mechanics. So basically, a scenario was set, and stakes were given, and this subtly made system occupancy far more interesting than it was, at least for role players. Now, I, as a role player, and in fact someone who was directly tied through my role play to the House of Sarm, this highly interested me, because I was actually role playing that my character's family had troops on the surface of the planet. And obviously, an invading army cut off and surrounded on a planet is kind of doomed, unless they can, either be relieved and reinforced or allowed to escape. So I took it upon myself to start the efforts to rebuild the Amarr militia, which had collapsed in the wake of the Warzone deal, because one had turned the Amarr militia against itself because not everybody agreed to give up the systems, because some people still lived in certain systems that had been agreed to be given up to the Minmatar. They didn't like that, and I was actually one of the ones who actively fought the other Amarr militia members who had agreed to do that. And two, it actually ended up killing content, at least PvP content, because fighting Minmatar militia, where they would actually care to fight for, was off limits. So a lot of people just left the Amarr militia or stopped logging in and stopped playing altogether. So Amarr militia was absolutely in shambles after the Warzone deal, and there was also when the stakes were given for this system of Pholossis win. So this precipitated basically an 8-month-long struggle for control of the system. And all through that time, basically that content for Pholossis win was kind of the seedbed for the rebuilding of Amarr militia and into what it is now, as it's been taken, kind of coalesced into Local's primary now. So
we have the numbers posted from Harkon in the podcast channel on the statistics on Pholossis win, with you, the two of you being number 1 and number 2 in the system. 915 billion killed over the time period, and considering that's there's no keep stars, like no fortizars in that. That's a lot of ships, right?
Yeah, I think only a few Astras died.
Yeah, there's some Astra houses, but
there were some big fights.
That's like a ship cost, right?
But yeah, through that whole time period, it was just constant. I was leading fleets almost every day. Amarr militia got some people throughout the campaign to fund us. So there was Saruno Ryasavi was a major player who was able to kind of fund us and was able to maintain the structures that we base out of. CD Loon, who was the leader of Red Sky Morning, which is one of the major Amarr faction war corps right now, and they're in Control V as well. Opik Doshu, who was another FC who led a lot of fleets throughout that time. Also, what was left of Damtasad Arnogard, your old corporation, Arsia. Gamatar, he led a lot of fleets. I remember Abel Trask, he was in it. Ooh, who else?
Yeah, DTHG is in the top 10 for that.
Yeah, do you remember any prominent names from our side, Harkon? And maybe you can run down who was leading and fighting for your side and kind of organizing things.
Well, it was mostly under the helm of Shutaq, as it was the main group on the Minmatar side. Actus Matari joined at the start and then left faction warfare after a while to then rejoin. By the way, when it comes to most expensive skills, maybe short by ISK once, and you will see something funny. So it was mostly Shutaq, and then other groups obviously joined in. A lot of militia members joined the fleets. What was the name? Blights actually had a faction warfare group for a while. Thucker something. He was around. Yeah, Blights Reds. And he had a small group that came. Pirates came over all the time. There were certain pirate groups that sided with one side, and then less pirate groups that sided with the other side. There were some pretty expensive ships being blown up all over the place, and it was from December to, I'd say, June. At least that's the end date I put for that search.
The end, I remember this very well. It was July when we finally
hosts in the system, and then
You're kind of cutting out, Aldrith. For the record, the most expensive kill, Aldrith's pod.
Just saying. The system fell on the 27th of June. And shortly before that, there was this big fight over the last Minmatar staging citadel in the system, the Oath of Vengeance, as we had called it. And there was a big clusterfuck. There was like 300 people or some shit like that, which was for faction warfare purposes was like big. Both sides fielded threats. We lost decisively, but we at least tried, I guess.
And for just for the record, tie-dye comes a lot faster in low-sec because Crime Watch is still active. So 300 people in low-sec, that's a tie-dye fight.
Sorry, just a quick mic check one more time. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, cool. So yeah, throughout that 8 months from December to June, it was just nearly constant fighting. I know I was trying to lead fleets as often as possible, almost every day. Harkon was doing the same, and yeah, that year we were definitely each other's rivals when the year-end video came out. And yeah, that last fight at the end where it culminated on Oath of Vengeance, that was one of the biggest fights I've ever seen for purely faction war reasons. But yeah, it was nuts that entire period. It was very intense fighting all the time. And it was a lot of fun. Really stressful for the pushers and movers, the leaders on both sides, but
a lot of people had to take breaks after that. And the funny part, the very interesting part was that the system changed hands multiple times in that period. So we took it in December, and then they retook it in March, 1st of March. We took it back a week later. They took it on 1st of April again. We took it back a bit more than 2 weeks later, and then we held it for a bit more than 2 months. And in the end, this rebuilding process was, I think, one of the main reasons why it was so successful was because there was non-stop content in those systems. Yeah. So every new player could just jump in and see explosions, see what faction warfare could be, as in non-stop fighting in plexus and fun. And that was in my whole faction warfare career, this 7 months period or 8 or whatever. That's like, this is what faction warfare can be. Obviously, I don't want to have that all the time because it is extremely stressful, and you get invested, right? If you see the news and everyone was waiting for, okay, we're holding the system, let's see what the news brings. Are we winning on the planet or not? What is going on now? Can be really intense, and that motivates people. But at the same time, it can burn out people if you're constantly grinding and you constantly. I mean, look at all those stupid kills. And it's like mostly frigates and destroyers, I'd say. And the amount of Punishers I've killed is, I hate Punishers. They are everywhere.
Yeah, the number of Tristans. And you were actually using Firetails in the beginning.
That was back in the Firetail area.
Yeah, they didn't trade well, and you learned quickly after that to switch to something else. But yeah, it was nuts. But even more so than that, it also attracted a lot of veteran players, at least the Amarr side, because it was suddenly not about, the farmers, dictating the terms of the war. It was about us, it was about the PvPers, and actually having to do organized play, really putting effort towards a goal, which was really lacking in faction war up until that point. And that was why, because both sides were invested in that storyline, or at least just the PvP, and it snowballed. I think it was only a few people initially who really cared about the storyline, but then players who were just interested in PvP came, and it's like, oh, hey, what's going on over here? And like, oh, no time to explain, just get in fleet. And it just snowballed on both sides, I think. At least the Amarr side, it wasn't so much about the RP. Obviously, I cared, and a few other people got invested in the storyline later, but it was more about the content. And when people realized, like, oh, the Minmatar are fighting over this, let's fight too. it just goes from there, and you can involve people who are not necessarily involved in RP through a lore-based storyline. As long as at least some people are involved.
A lot of big fights can come from RPers just starting crap with each other for reasons that non-RPers wouldn't, and then everybody piles in. That's kind of what happened with the Potchven War, too.
Yeah, and by the end of it, like, most players who are involved have no idea what's going on or why they're doing it. It's just fun. So, yeah.
That's accurate for most stuff in the game, right?
But for me, one of the important lessons was that it basically showed what faction war could be if there was proper goals set. Because right now, I mean, Amarr took the Warzone for a second time last year. So basically, all the groups have taken it twice, if I'm correct, and Caldari twice or whatever. So there isn't really that big goal to push forward for, right? And
yeah,
I mean, go ahead.
And the thing about the entire system takes is that those generally don't happen with big fights. What usually happens is that one side collapses, and then it just becomes, an easy kind of pushover for the other side, who are still organized and intact. Because I know what happened in this, at least in the second Amarr take, was that you guys were burnt out after Pholossis win and after losing all your structures to Snuffed, and you didn't really have a presence in the Warzone anymore because we had pushed so hard and the pirates had blown everything else up that you guys were kind of burnt out and had to recoalesce, and that's part of the reason why we were able to take the Warzone.
I partly agree. Yeah, it also had to do with just the growth and the strength that Control V came out of the whole Pholossis win thing, I think, and different groups in Minmil not having the intent or not seeing the reason to defend systems or whatnot. But from all the Warzone takes, I'd say that the last Amarr one was at least the most contested, because at least we had something like the Bossburger Siege, right, where there was a lot of fighting. In all of the takings before that, there was no such thing. There was basically like small groups trying to defend certain systems, but that's that. But again, so it shows what is possible if there is some kind of narrative behind it, some kind of aim for both sides, right? And it doesn't need to be a big one for everyone, because if a few people are committed to it, then it just spirals, as Aldrith said, right? So if we had systems matter, as in, for example, with a frontline system, just saying, then fights would culminate in those systems. Because right now, it's just the players, as in the Minmatar and Amarr Militia members, that give systems meaning. Because we lived there for so and so long, we held this system for so and so long. This system was picked as our home system back in 2014 or whatever. That's the reason why fights happen. Because other than that, the owning of a system doesn't really give you much.
And the narrative made people care, and the fights made other people care. And that's
Exactly.
what happened with Pholossis win, and it was like the biggest fighting in faction warfare ever.
I mean, it just took one little angry forum post, and then like one or two.
It took basically a deal and a shit post.
Yeah,
and
that's what it takes. And I mean, I don't know who paid those 900 billions, but they exploded, and it was a lot of fun. And that is the lesson that can be learned from it, right? If there is some kind of incentive, some kind of like, this is the goal, or this is an important system because you needed to do X, Y, Z, right? Then shit can happen. And that's currently lacking again. And what is actually happening right now is that Minmatar decided, oh, hey, news say that they might invade again, or they are already at it, I don't know, hard to say. We're going for Pholossis win again. So people are right now fighting over Pholossis win while we are wasting air here. And that means that there's going to be new content, but it is created by people that care about the system, and to a certain degree, obviously, of people that care about the pew pew, but it is player driven, as in we give it meaning. We decide which system we're actually going to fight about.
Is there anything mechanically that you think CCP should be doing or Institute that would support what y'all would like? And just kind of like your top one or two items.
I mean, that's a huge kind of. Sorry, one more time. Mic check. Hello.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, it is kind of a huge can of worms, but like I've heard a number of folks mention, campaigns instead of take this one system, maybe it's a series that have to be done that flips multiple things, and just want your ideas on that.
Yeah. Okay, so there's been so much discussion on potential faction warfare mechanics changes over the years that it's all become kind of a weird slush. But one of the major themes that keeps on recurring is to give the Warzone some kind of sense of direction and an actual flow rather than just like, oh, everything's Minmatar now, oh, everything's Amarr again. I don't know what's going on or why, but whatever. Is the frontline system, where basically you can only take the system, take systems that are adjacent to a system that your faction owns, or maybe having only certain constellations be vulnerable at a certain time. So you can maybe not concentrate fighting in just one or two systems, or maybe the 5 or 6 that are bordering your enemy, but the constellations. And then once an entire constellation gets secured, then it gets locked, and then the next constellation next becomes the contested zone. It's mainly about providing goals, because the thing is that as it is right now, major fights only happen when both sides happen to decide, oh, this system is important for whatever reason. And that does not happen that often, or at least not as often as it should, because it's only maybe a few times a year where major system sieges happen. And kind of us in the faction war PvP community kind of want that option to be around all the time, at least. So I don't know. It's something CCP would have to work out to focus the attentions of the FW players so that we actually get into scraps and we care about them. It's a complicated can of worms.
So,
Well, yeah, because it would be making the terrain important again.
Yeah.
As somebody who doesn't like the tier system and think it's counterproductive, I want to ask you two, what do you think of the tier system?
So tiers, okay. I think as it is right now, it's ridiculously punishing to those who are losing. And that is part of the reason why it drives Exodus's,
It encourages people to pile into the winning side. Yes. And that's the opposite of what you want.
Exactly. You want kind of some kind of balance, at least for the PvP side of it.
Yeah.
I mean, but what it ends up doing is that it just incentivizes the people who are interested in to pile onto the winning side, which just overwhelms all the people who actually want to fight, and it kind of rips away the entire concept of system ownership from PvPers and puts it in the hands of people who are just devaluing our loyalty points, our ostensible rewards for participating in this system. So we don't even get to reap the major portion of the rewards for this system, because we're busy fighting. And when you're fighting, you're not making LP necessarily. You're sharing it with whoever is in the Plex with you, or you're not doing the missions. So you don't end up accumulating nearly as much as these farmers do. So you are kind of cheated out of the system by its very nature, and it sucks, and nobody likes it. So no.
Yeah, one of the things that I support is just something similar to how there's the dynamic bounty system, but very, very recent PvP activity would massively push up the amount of LP for specifically plexing. So people in fleets would get at least equivalent LP to solo plexing. And I think that's something that desperately needs to be added. Aldrith has given some input. So Harkon, do you have anything to say about any of the stuff that's been said recently?
Well, first for the frontline system, I brought it up as well. Aldrith talked about it.
Yeah.
Hundreds of people have brought it up. The problem is also that over the years the population has just decreased. So there's a lot of systems where there's no one living there. There's no one active there. So that's a perfect farming ground for just people and partly bots that just farm LP. And for me, it's not necessarily that I get cheated out of everything, of any income or whatever. I don't care too much about that aspect, so I understand that some people do. It's more like you don't have control over the Warzone because you know that stupid app and tide system will come into play, and sooner or later, no matter what you do, you're going to lose systems, or you're going to burn out trying to chase off all the farmers, which people tried over the years multiple times. We had a little campaign at the start of the year with Esteros just hunting Kaldari farmers that were farming our systems. But that you can't do that over a long period of time. And so you just feel like it doesn't matter what you do. You can only ever be like, okay, we want to keep this, and that system. And the rest, well, we'll see. Maybe we can hold a few more, but those are the systems we care about, and we're going to defend those. And that just feels bad. And if there was some kind of frontline system, you could be like, okay, if we defend this one system, those 10 systems behind it are safe. There's no way farmers can just flip it behind us. We just have to defend that one system to save 10. And so it is very important that that system is held, and that means both sides can actually have proper fights there. And as Aldrith said, right now it's more or less, do we care about the system enough to fight over it, or will we just let it go and maybe retake it later?
I think what Harkon just said is really important, because as somebody who has spent a lot of time in faction warfare now, some on both sides, one of the reasons why I like roaming so much is because a lot of times you do just feel like, I can't freaking do anything because of all the farmers. I'm just going to like lose so-and-so systems, right? Unless I somehow stay up 24/7 and play whack-a-mole. And it's really frustrating, and like takes away the agency of the players who actually care about the fighting and the Warzone control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's that added precipitated the entire Warzone deal, which was part.
You broke up again.
Yeah, you died.
No, I did not mute the Amarr guy.
Though I would understand it.
Maybe I did. Let me check.
No, he's fine. I think it's just his headset problems.
Aldrith, how do you FC with that headset?
I was about to ask. Did we really lose the system to a guy that cuts out every 20 seconds?
No, it's the laptop that I've been playing on for 4 years. It's the headset jack is messed up. But anyway, yeah. Where were we? Okay, LP system, frontline system. Yeah, so yeah, basically, as it is now, it's part of the reason why the whole Warzone deal coalesced and became a thing. It was partly a protest towards CCP to say, hey, there's very clear and obvious flaws in this faction war system. It's part of the reason why so few people in your game are taking part of it, and yet we still have this dedicated subset of players who are in it for the PvP and enjoy it very much, because the PvP can be very enjoyable. The problem is that it's not enjoyable frequently enough, because what has to happen is both sides have to decide, we want to stand and fight here. And that doesn't happen enough as is. Hello?
Yes, you're good. We heard that.
I was processing.
Okay.
That was one of those conversation ending remarks. No, but that was good thoughts. That's for damn sure.
Pretty much full agreement.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, it doesn't necessarily matter what CCP comes up with if there's another system to kind of solve that problem. But basically, you need to make sure both sides want certain places and that we're fighting towards those same goals. And one, don't punish the losers so horrifically that they basically can't make a living after they lose, and don't reward the winners so much that everybody just piles onto that for the sake of it. What you want is a system that encourages even sides fighting for the same things, you know? And if CCP can figure that out, I think faction warfare would be a much better place.
Which
Yeah.
is especially important because it is an entry for a lot of new players. It can be something for casual players. It can be something for really competitive players. There's room for all of those players, and also for new bros that just joined the game and want to learn how to PvP, or industrialists from HiSec that join and be like, okay, I'm gonna try PvP. Where do I go? Faction warfare, because compared to nullsec, you're usually not one out of 100 people that presses the button at the right time, and that's your contribution, which I don't want to look down on that or anything. It's a gameplay that people enjoy. It's fine. But here you're part of like 20 people, maybe even 10, maybe 5, and you are really making an impact. You can make an impact even with smaller groups and as a newer player. And that is something that should be cultivated, because it is actually a perfect entry into the PvP area of the game. You can move on to nullsec or whatever wormhole, what you want, but that entry level is something that CCP should actually be. It could be the kindergarten for EVE Online, but it is not, and it hasn't seen much love, at least from my perspective. And the only thing that happened recently was basically after the whole conspiracy against CCP by trying to block those mission running systems, that they reduced the income for LP a bit and did some shenanigans with Plexus, but the whole system wasn't changed.
Do you think CCP will have that in the short term? Because I feel like since I've been playing this game since 2014, 2015, everyone's been asking for a faction warfare rework. And it's like almost a decade later and no one's seen it yet besides the little things here and there.
Yeah, I can speak for most people on the Amarr side saying that we're very jaded about the prospects. Like, we did get a very nice update and tweaking that had all the changes that they made, maybe it was 1 or 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
Where they added like
2019.
the suspect timer for entering
Gate
Flex.
from long away.
Yeah.
Suspect timer was really good.
Yeah, CCP did some extremely good tweaks, but that's all they were. They were just tweaks. So it's better than it was before that whole thing, but it's going to take more effort on their part to make it into a system that is really engaging for both new players and veteran players. Because I, as a veteran player, really like faction war. I actually started playing Eve for faction warfare because the storyline was gripping. They had some really good trailers for its introduction, but the system itself is unfortunately still lacking, and it could be a lot better, and it could not just be a kindergarten for new players getting into PvP, but a competitive, serious place for people to stay, make an entire Eve career out of, and start reaching the pinnacles of Eve gameplay, which is capitals and controlling space and making tons of money.
All right, I'm gonna take exception to that. As someone who's done small gang and null war, and I have not done faction war, so take it for what it's worth. I do not consider what y'all are doing as kindergarten. That to me is the zenith of the small gang, small warfare.
Oh, yeah.
I've been that F1 monkey, and I've run fleets in null. That's you got one guy playing and 50 pushing F1. I much prefer what I'm seeing y'all do.
So
yeah.
What always stands out to me in the fights in faction warfare at LoSec is that there's so many different kinds of people who show up. There's the new players, there's the veteran players, there's the elite nano gang 360 no scope people, there's the super organized pirates that show up and duck on everyone. It's just it reminds me of that meme that Odysseus Alakar made with the Citadel owner, and then they're just being shocked at all these different groups of people dancing that are showing up to the fight. And it's very rarely just the two 2 sides involved. It's oftentimes like 4 or 5 sides, isn't it?
Yeah, especially as groups get bigger, the more people you have, the more friends you're going to have too, because everybody has been everywhere. So, yeah, there's definitely an element of that. And then as you get into bigger PvP, you kind of make friends with some pirate groups to go against other pirate groups. Like I know right now, Control V is teaming up with Baltram's group and fighting Shadow Cartel a lot. So, yeah, there's lots of options for general low sec activity as well, which is what that is.
Just as a clarification, right? When I said kindergarten, I didn't mean that everyone in faction warfare is a noob and sort of, but no, I was more referring to it can be a very good entrance level. And as I said before, you can have the hardcore players, you can have the casual players. It's a very good environment to just learn the ropes and then decide, do you want to stay? Yeah, do you want to stay? Do you want to commit to faction warfare small gang or whatever it is? It is. But just on that entry level, think about the opportunity to just join an NPC corp. You don't have to join a nullsec block and move all your stuff out. You can just stage out of an NPC station in faction warfare, even in high sec. Do one jump and be in the fight, and that's something that should be cultivated and made into something better than it currently is. And as Aldrith said, there's people that love faction warfare. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about 2014 or even before that when people joined, right? But you can only grind so long before you get somewhat delusional. And when it comes to changes in the near future, I thought we all travel to Iceland to make sure that happens, right, Arsia?
Yeah, that's why we're gonna get together and take out our torches and pitchforks and yeah.
Yeah, we all know that CCP response to those.
Me. But so I think it's actually really important that it's attractive to both veterans and new players, because the new players kind of need the veterans to learn from.
I think speaking of like trying to get change from CCP, I remember one, I don't know if it was FanFest or Vegas, but Wormholer brought like a thick stack of postcards that had CCP's at like office address on it, and it said, please add Alliance bookmarks. And so then people just had to stamp it and mail it, and like within a year we had Alliance bookmarks. So maybe you guys could try that. I don't know if we'd see action within a year, but
whatchamacallit, the access list bookmarks, which are even better than Alliance bookmarks.
Yeah, it was like players, like if you actually like have like a tangible change that all of CCP can see, like I know CCP watches this podcast, but like having mail show up at their place, or I don't know, Google Doc explaining stuff, like usually they kind of listen. And I know Arsia and other CSM of the past have been essentially probably begging CCP for faction warfare changes, so hopefully we see something.
So you're saying we don't have to burn something down?
Oh,
I mean,
pitchfork is very symbolic, though.
Better be sure, right? I mean,
yeah, it's better safe than sorry, Aldrith.
Okay.
So you coming to Iceland with us?
I might think about it. It's in May, right?
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe. I'll see.
I know we're like 20 minutes from the 2-hour mark, and you guys said you only had 2 hours for this. This has been really informative. It does not feel like we've been streaming for 2 hours. I feel like we've covered so much.
Yeah, it's been a good time. Anything else we should talk about? Or, I don't know, where things are right now, maybe, or what's going on for the future?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question for all of you FW folk. If a newer player or an older player wants to get involved, where do they?
I think the best thing you should do, this is what I would do if I was just getting into it, is I would look at the kill boards for the faction that you want to join for whatever reason, or if you're not sure which faction, look at all of them, and then just see who are the top killers, who where the fights are going. Yeah, which systems. Yeah, which systems are the most active in your time zone? Which corps are the most active in your time zone? And then you just start talking to the people. Like either join the NPC corp initially alone, introduce yourself properly to kind of the some of the CEOs or some of the FCs. Because the thing is that people going straight into the NPC Corp are oftentimes very looked upon with a lot of suspicion and sometimes outright hostility, unfortunately, because they think that either they're just farmers or they're a spy alt or something like that. So you actually have to kind of do your research and talk to people and gain people's trust before they might let you into their faction war corp, especially if they're on the higher end of things, because they have a lot of assets they want to protect and they don't want to get ganked by whatever entity you might be spying for. So I'd say look for who are the best players and the most active players, start talking to them and say, hey, well, I'm interested in this for this reason. Would you like to recruit me, or can you point me towards somebody else?
And if you're a spy, please bring good content.
And if you're a spy, you can just apply to Kia. They take everyone. Now, it's basically what Aldrith said, but I think for the most part, you don't have to have this like barrier in front of you. You can join the NPC Corp, and most fleets, at least I'm talking for Minmatar, I'm not sure, but I would think it's the same for Galanti, Kalari, and Amarr. Most fleets are somewhat open to militia, so you just join the fleet, and if you earn the trust in just flying with the fleets, just having fun with the others, shouldn't be too hard to join a group. But in general, you should definitely sooner or later join a group, because it helps a lot with logistics. They can help you with fittings. They can help you with a lot of things that if you try to figure that alone, risk of just being overwhelmed by. So yeah, joining a group is a good thing, but again, being in a TLF or in the Crusade or whatever the other two are called that are over there, can be fun as well. And you can just have that casual gameplay of joining open fleets, doing some pew pew, and then logging off again.
Nice. Are you gonna go join faction warfare, Nick, now?
Not today, but the thought is there.
Galanti can sure need some help.
Yeah, Galanti are actually on the offensive right now. So I think Caldari have been suppressing their Warzone for a good 6 months now, and now the Galanti are just starting to claw back. It's a good time to join.
Feels longer than 6 months, man. That was really odd.
Oh yeah, the swings this time around have been very strange. There's something going on with the normal way the Warzone was working. Like in the Amarr Militia, Amarr Minmatar Warzone, the swing generally lasts about 6 months for each side. This last turnaround has only been about 3. So I don't know. Maybe it's because CCP is cracking down more on bots, or I don't know. Maybe just interest has waned so much, or somebody is actively manipulating the war zones or something. I don't know what's going on.
I've definitely noticed some of the big farmers from years past have kind of disappeared, like the pings. Like, you haven't seen the pings around, have you? They used to farm 23.5/7 for like years, flipping back and forth. And whenever you came at them, they just put an exclamation point in local.
Yeah, and honestly, we all suspected players like this of like doing real money transactions, and just generally things are against CCP's terms and conditions, and they might have just gotten banned. We don't know. So I don't know. Maybe CCP is cracking down on these things more, because I know there was a whole series of bots that were in coercers for a good year, and now they've all disappeared. Now they're all in Tristan's.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have to work up to that coercer.
Yeah.
It is an interesting time. So when we're looking at the war zones right now, as mentioned by Aldrith, the Galanti have been on the defensive for quite some time. They'd actually lost the whole war zone round about the same time as we did, but had a very hard time to claw back from that. And both Minmatar and Galanti are currently on the upswing from the looks of it. So we're in T3 now, pushing Tier 4, whoever is doing that. And yeah, I think it's going to be the same with the Galanti soon. They're going to take more systems. But we are currently focusing on a certain system that we talked about a bit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so, okay, so right now what's going on, actually right before this program, I was in a fleet in Pholossis fighting Minmatar, same old. But yeah, it looks like Ushkan at least has launched a major offensive against Pholossis, and it's right next door to where Local's primary mainly base is, which is Asset. So it's going to be a major point of contention going forward. We have both stocked plexing comps. We're fighting every night, every day. It's pretty much constant, as long as we have enough numbers to contest each other. So yeah, as soon as this ends, I'm probably going to go back and start FCing. So yeah, come and check it out and start looking into it.
That's good to know. We do have a lot of folks in chat who are either in faction warfare or could potentially join.
What was that?
I said we do have a lot of folks in chat who are either in faction warfare or could potentially join too.
Oh yeah, cool. Yeah.
So I think, unless Arsia, you have any other topics or these folks want to ask anything else, I think that winds down our faction warfare discussion.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good.
Do you guys have any? What's up?
I was gonna say we could obviously go into like specifics of stuff for like ever, but I think that's a really good general overview from start to finish.
That was awesome.
I feel like we needed this to be like its own show rather than, part of the Sunday show, because we could talk about so much.
Well, there's so much I've learned from it, because I'm not a faction war guy, as you all know, but hearing about it really gets me kind of stoked to go like load up some antimatter and deal with somebody, especially those Amarr bastards.
Oh, I'm glad.
But
I will answer you mercilessly.
I meant it with all love, brother.
Oh, of course. I mean it too. I love it when people try to kill me.
All right, so I know if you guys have any final thoughts, we can continue the show to cover more general news, but that way you guys can share, and then if you have to go do other things, you're more than welcome to take off. Sorry.
Okay, so I mean, I guess in conclusion, faction war, it is a flawed system, but those of us who do take part in it and have a passion for it have, kind of mostly figured out the ways around it, how to avoid a burnout and all that. And we do have a lot of PvP available. And if it's not going to be the other militia, it is low sec, so we do have, everybody in low sec to PvP against. So, and we do that quite frequently. The Call Vector is a very good FC, and he runs a tight ship in Control V, locals. And we do have a lot of fun. We've been getting to much bigger fights lately with pirate entities as well. We do fight the friendly people over at Ushkan and Harkon Thorson as well, quite frequently. And there's slots open from the bottom to the top. So, yeah, come and have fun. Faction War is great. It can be better, though, but it is great. So, yeah, thanks.
And for you, what is your last take? Harkon Thorson, my best buddy in the entire world.
That is definitely not true, but yeah, my take. So Aldrith said most of it. Faction warfare can be really, really funny. It can be all the things you're looking for in EVE, all the excitement, all the feel of satisfaction when you actually reach a certain goal. And if it's only taking that one stupid system that everyone's talking about, it can be very fulfilling. It can obviously be frustrating. It could be even better, but in general, it is where a lot of fun could be had. So join up. Side is more or less irrelevant. That's the word. So come and join Faction Warfare.
Alrighty, thank you both. So that was our faction warfare discussion for the Sunday show. There's been a lot of news the last couple weeks. I know we were on last week, but next week we'll try to catch up on all of it. Some of the news is more timely. Some of it is more, say, hot topic drama-y. than I would like, but we'll continue next week. So I hope to see everyone there. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Arsia, for essentially running the show because you're the expert, and then both Aldrith and Harkon for hanging out and sharing their faction warfare information.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.